The reality we live in can be a very strange place. Most of the time, fact being stranger than fiction. How will we ever start to understand this reality we live in unless we question everything? Join me and a guest as we unravel the mysteries of this reality, one topic at a time. This is Increase the Reality with Shayn Jones.
What is up, inquirers, and welcome to the expanse of Deep Open-Minded Conversation. I'm the one they call Shayn, and today for you guys, we're diving back into one of my favorite subcategories of the Sasquatch phenomenon, specifically the Alaskan Sasquatch phenomenon. And all of this information is brought forth by not only a Sasquatch investigator, but also a former police officer. So it's always fascinating to get their side of all of the research and details into all of these different stories and stuff. And honestly, I got the pleasure of meeting this guy at Small Town Monster Fest through getting connected with him through Alex Petikoff. So I figured I should bring him on the show, and it ended up being a great conversation. So before we get into that, of course, we have to do news and updates and front of house. As far as news and updates go, I'm at a crossroads trying to figure out which would be the best way to go about this. But as far as the Patreon goes, I would like to either create an additional show that's different from Bizarre Inquiries, that's mainly just a solo show with me. I've had a few ideas for it that I've tossed around as far as the Patreon members go. So I do have an idea for that, and that's definitely something doable. But the other side of it that I could definitely do, that it seems like a lot of you guys seem to enjoy as far as other podcasts and stuff go, are the extended conversations where, we can end the show and then we go on to the Patreon and we do maybe another half hour or so. But I want to figure out what you guys think is the best course of action, what you guys would like to hear the most. So let me know if you guys would like to hear another Patreon exclusive show, or if you guys would like to hear extended conversations with the regular episodes of the show. And leading into new front of house stuff, if anybody has encounters that they would like to report, you guys can report those to ommencounterreports@outlook.com. Doesn't matter how big, doesn't matter how small. I would definitely love to hear about them. And you guys can either type them out, and you guys can send them to me through email or through the link tree. There is a specific submission form for that, or you guys can even do it through social media. Or the other option is that you guys can record yourself and you guys can send that to me through email, preferably not over Instagram, because sometimes those don't let you replay them, and I'd love to be able to record them and play them on the show. But again, none of that will happen unless you guys report those encounters to ommencounterreports@outlook.com. And if you guys want to support the show, there's a couple of different ways to do so. One of the ways that I'm trying to push right now is if you guys don't mind leaving reviews or ratings for the show on iTunes or Spotify, I would definitely appreciate it. Boost up the show in the algorithms, and with that, I have more people coming in and wanting to share their encounters, share their research. So I'm trying to do it so that I can bring in some more awesome guests for you guys, but I won't be able to do that, of course, without your guys' help. So if you guys don't mind taking that extra 10, 15 seconds, if you guys think I deserve it, to leave that 5-star review, I will, of course, read on the show and give you guys a big shout out. And number 2, for supporting the show, you guys can go and join the Patreon. Over there, I have the $1 tier, the $3 tier, and the $5 tier. All of those, there's a 7-day free trial for them. So if you guys want to check them out and see what they're all about, a lot of new updates coming as far as Patreon goes, like I was mentioning in the beginning, trying to expand that and make it so there's more stuff that you guys want. And I know that most podcasts have a little bit of a down spike during summer, so I'm trying to make sure that I have all this stuff coming up for you guys as far as when fall hits, so you guys have a bunch of awesome stuff to listen to when you guys are stuck in the house when it starts getting a little bit colder out. And the third way you guys can support the show is through going and checking out the Open Minds Media merch store. Over there, it's not just podcast designs. What I've been focusing on lately is a bunch of cryptid, UFO, paranormal, conspiratorial, all of those type of designs. There, of course, are the podcast logo designs, but that's not the focus of the store. I'm trying to build that up as a t-shirt company. So if you guys are interested in all of that kind of weird stuff, don't forget to go and keep tabs on the Open Minds Media merch store. Anytime there is a new shirt drop, that will be posted on the Instagram and everything, of course. So make sure you guys keep your eyes out over there. And if you guys see anything that you guys would like to scoop for yourself, you guys can use code Cryptid10 at checkout for 10% off. And if you guys want to stay up to date on the show, including the Open Minds Media merch store, you guys can go and follow Inquiries of Our Reality and Open Minds Media on Instagram, Facebook, Discord, YouTube, and TikTok. And every single thing that I mentioned is all available in the link tree, which is available down in the show description. And with that, let's get into the show. Please welcome to the show, Larry Beans Baxter from Alaskan. See, I'm messing it up now. Alasquatch podcast. How's it going today, man?
I jinx you.
That's what I was going to say.
He said, because he said it perfectly earlier. I was like, dude, that's awesome. I'm impressed. Like most people, they struggle with it. And he was like, no, I got this, man. I got you.
I got stuck halfway through. I got the and then it stopped.
I know. I need to get a podcast that just has like one or two syllables in the name.
No, it's honestly a good name, though. Like, when you see it written, it's like maybe weird to pronounce, but it's aesthetically pleasing to the eye to see the way it's spelled. Because it's like, when you're visually looking at it, you know completely what you're going for. But if you're hearing it out loud, it may not be one of those things that registers right away. But it is a good, solid name. Like, I do like the way that it looks visually, for sure.
Yeah. I've had a couple other people, after I started the podcast, come up to me and be like, man, I was going to use that name, and now you got it. So I think I great minds think alike, I guess.
Hey, a lot of the time that doesn't stop people, though, because I've seen a few podcasts that have popped up with like almost the same name as my podcast. So it's like people will look stuff up and they'll be like, oh, I like that name and I'm going to use it anyway. So it's like, if they're going to do it, they're going to do it. So you just got to hope you have some of those people that try to find one that, at least for me, when I found my name, I wanted to find something that it didn't pop up for anything else on the internet. So if people looked it up, they would just find that. But I guess some people don't necessarily think that way. They're just like, this is the name. I like it. Don't care about any of the other attachments to it.
Yeah. There was one not too long ago where a guy was, I can't remember which podcast. Oh, it was a Sasquatch Experience. Those guys, Sean Forker and those guys, and somebody else just started up another podcast called the Sasquatch Experience. And they were like, I mean, they've been around for like a long time, like a decade or more. And this guy is like, yeah, I'm going to, start, I'm going to start this podcast. And they were like, oh, come on. And I think he did. He changed his name, but it was like, I mean, a little Google search first, before you coin a name.
Dude, I have something going on like that right now. So I have my other show that's Bizarre Encounters, and I had to change the name to Bizarre Encounters with Shayn Orin because I already had that like on the logo. I just didn't put it into the name because there was another podcast that popped up, and they're calling themselves Bizarre Encounters Podcast, and it says established in 2018. I'm like, no, I've been around for 3 years and nothing else popped up with this name. And then I look at their episodes and they just started posting them in June. I'm just like, come on, man. Like, you couldn't have picked something else. Like, I've been running this show name for like 3 years now. Like, give me my name.
No, we were here first. No backsies.
Yeah, pretty much. The good news is you just got to try to make sure you take up the feed. So if anybody looks it up, they're just going to end up popping up with yours anyways. So maybe it'll end up helping you out in the long run because people will be looking up that one and then they'll also get pushed towards yours. If you have the name, you just got to make sure that you're the one that takes over the Google searches with the name.
True.
But I guess kind of getting into stuff a little bit, man. I know you said that you kind of have a story behind the name Larry Beans Baxter. And I also kind of wanted to get a little bit of your background before we get into the conversation and let everybody know kind of where you're coming from as far as your research, your podcasts, and exactly what you do.
Yeah, well, I'll tell about the nickname first. It's not an exciting story. People always think there's some great story behind it. We're like, oh, man, I bet he ate a bunch of beans. And then, was like sitting around a campfire or something and caught somebody on fire or something. It's nothing like that at all. There was a TV show called Beans Baxter, and it came on right around the time that like the Fox network started. I think Married with Children, 21 Jump Street, and they had a really cool underrated show called Werewolf. But Beans Baxter was like in that lineup, and my last name is Baxter, so it just kind of people start calling me that at school, and it just kind of stuck. And it didn't hurt. My dad's name was Larry and my name was Larry. So it was kind of a way to like differentiate us. And it just stuck, man. I mean, it's just like I think of myself as like I'm, like the dude, like the Big Lebowski. Like I'm Beans. If somebody calls me Larry, I'm like, you mean me? Like it just stuck. Like
Who the hell's
my
Larry?
name. Yeah.
What's kind of funny is before we started, I didn't know if that was like your nickname, like what exactly was like the meaning behind that name. Because kind of a funny side story. I have a Sphinx cat, and her name is Blix. But I don't know how it started one day, but we just started calling her Beans. So we've been calling her Beans ever since. So it's kind of funny. The only person or thing that I've ever heard use the nickname Beans before, other than like in a TV show, is my cat. Because then, of course, like there's Beans from Even Stevens, the one that you're mentioning on the show. So it's like sometimes a character name for shows, but it's not a very common nickname when you're actually in person with people.
Yeah. Well, I've got 2 or 3 names for all of my. I've got a dog named Bubbles, and I call him Boobert.
I think all of them end up getting abbreviations that end with like E, because we'll call her like Beansy, and I have a cat named Winter. We call her Winnie. Like any of them, if there's not a nickname that doesn't end in like an E, like a Y or an IE sound, then we end up coming up with one. Like I have a cat named Nezuko, and we call her Nezzy just because it fits in with like the the names. And then we have one named Kaneki, so it still has the IE at the end still. So completely accidental, but all my cats have nicknames that end with the Y or IE.
Yeah. Well, my female dog, her name is Hurley, and I call her Harleen Boogerbean.
Every animal has a ridiculous nickname. Because I think if I went through all my animals, like we call her Bag of Beans sometimes. Like they all, they just have like their weird nicknames. But kind of getting into some of your stuff too. Of course, being a podcaster, it's always good to have like that nickname too, because it kind of separates you from other people, and you can yell something in a room and not everybody's looking at it, because obviously, like I said, nobody uses the nickname Beans. But where did that kind of come into with like your podcast and everything? Like, did you start using that also as like your, I guess, alias and stuff like that for your podcast? And like, where to kind of always branch into your podcast?
I just started using it because basically that's what people call me. I mean, even like at work, people would call me Beans. I mean, it was just kind of my name. So I wasn't really thinking when I started the podcast, I didn't even have that conversation like, well, should I go by Larry or should I go by Beans? The only time I really like had like a like, what name do I use moment was when I was writing my book, and I'm like,
you want people to take you seriously. You can't put Beans on the cover.
I'm like, I think I should probably just go with my given name, because I think Beans Baxter on a book cover just seems a little weird. So I went ahead and but that was the only time where I was ever like, what name should I use? But everything else has always been Beans. And then, of course, that's a good icebreaker too, because you use that and people are like, why do they call you that? And you get to tell the story, and it just. It's not. I remember one of my oldest and dearest friends. He refused to call me Beans. Like he was just like, you're a grown man. I'm not calling you Beans. And one day, I mean, we were like 18, 19 years old, and he calls my house one day and he goes, "Is Larry there?" And my mom goes, "Do you mean Beans?" And he's like, "Okay, I give up. I'll call him Beans." So.
When the mom calls him Beans too, then you kind of just have to go with it.
he was like, I give up.
There's a couple people I know that actually just don't like their first name, and they just end up picking like some totally random name, and like they'll have their old family friends that still call them that name, but like it's kind of funny. Everybody gets to a point where like the nickname ends up just becoming like their full name, and then the only people that call them that nickname is like family and friends. But even when family and friends call them that, they still kind of look at them funny.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I think about myself in my head, is being like, when I talk to myself, I'm like, oh, damn it, Beans, or whatever. Like, I don't even think of myself as like Larry or anything like that.
What's kind of funny is that it weirdly kind of goes with the whole like Sasquatch podcast concept too, because when I hear like Beans, you think of like sitting around a campfire with Beans. You could totally like do some kind of like play on words or something like that if you have people come in and tell encounter stories.
Yeah, it's always funny because people are like, how'd you get that name? And I'm like, well, how do you think I got it? And they're like, oh, it has to do with the musical fruit, like it has to be some kind of campground story or something. I'm like, not at all.
Hit him out of left field with it. Because honestly, that's what I would have kind of assumed too, was that it may have been like some kind of camp story or something like that, or a bad placed fart story or something.
But no, I grew up in Kentucky and in a really small town, and I lived across the street from the library, and they had my favorite section in the library was where the monster books were, and like the Time Life Mysteries of the Unknown series, and I read those books and I loved them, and I just really had I mean, like all kids, I was into monsters, and
At least everybody in
just
this
kind of
community, that is.
yeah, and I mean, yeah, my origin is no different than anybody else's. I grew up watching In Search of and the $6 Million Man and all that stuff, unsolved mysteries, and just really kind of fell in love with the notion of monsters. And I think probably, and I mean, in my opinion, I think Bigfoot is probably the most likely cryptid to exist, other than maybe like the thylacine or something that is extinct and still around. And I just kind of, throughout my life, that interest was still there. I kind of would bounce between like UFOs, cryptids, ghosts, stuff like that. But I grew up and I joined the military. I said, I don't care where the military sends me as long as it's nowhere cold. And straight to Alaska I went.
I had a feeling.
And but the joke was on them because I actually love it here. And met my wife up here. And I got up here and I started hearing about all the cryptid activity up here, the Bigfoot stories up here, and I thought, man, if there's any place in the world where Bigfoot lives, it's probably up here. Like it's got to be, because a lot of people, everybody talks about how big Alaska is, but until you like see it and experience for yourself, it's hard to it's hard to realize. I mean, it is just massive, and there's a lot of space up here, and it wouldn't surprise me if there's. I think it was just a few years ago they discovered a new species of squirrel up here, and it wouldn't surprise me a bit if there's more than that. Maybe not anything big like Bigfoot, but there's other creatures up here that we don't know about in Alaska. Maybe other species, especially marine life.
I mean, I've seen like the demographic maps for like Canada and Alaska, and it's like all concentrated in a couple center locations. And then it actually has points on the map where it says 0 to 1 people live in this area. So I mean, who knows, man? There's weird mammals that'll just live within like a certain area. So I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of undiscovered bigger mammals out there too.
Yeah, and it's just, I mean, like the Caribou Hills are north of my house here where I live. I could walk out my front door right now, start walking, and once I get through the neighborhood here and get into the Caribou Hills, I'd probably walk for the rest of my life and never see another person. It might not be that long depending on like what animals I run into, but but I could literally like walk and just probably never see another person.
I hear those Alaskan bears are no joke. From like anybody ever that goes up there, like all the cryptid hunters and stuff, they have like specific guys that'll just watch for bears.
Yeah, I've had I have a black bear that hangs around here in the neighborhood, but just about 3 miles here from my house, there was a gentleman, I believe he was a Coast Guard member, mauled by a brown bear about 3 miles down the road here from where I'm sitting now. And you just got to be aware. You got to be aware of your surroundings. Well, last night we were taking the dogs out for a walk. Started walking down the driveway, and my wife's looking at something on her phone, and I'm looking down the driveway, and there's a moose at the end of the driveway, and I'm like, "Hey, come on, turn around. We got to go." Like there's a moose, and she was just, oh, okay,
I don't think people realize how big moose actually are. Like those things, if they get spooked, like they're gonna trample somebody. Like those things are. I'm trying to think about like a good height differentiation for people. Like a grown man, you kind of go up to roughly like around their neck, like the base of their neck. We had a gentleman.
I believe it was it May? Here about 6 miles from where I live, we had a gentleman that was killed by a moose. He was trying to take a picture of. She had just dropped twin babies. And he got too close, and she ended up trampling him to death. And that was just down the road from me here. So, every year something happens where somebody gets attacked by a bear or a moose or something. And, this guy, he wasn't a tourist. He's a lifelong, he'd been up here for a long time. He knew the deal. And sometimes, no matter how careful you are or how prepared you are, sometimes nature just has, to whom it may concern, attitude, and she's going to get you,
especially one that just gave birth to. I mean, that's like you're kind of playing at your own risk at that point, no matter what way you're looking at or what animal you're trying to take a picture of. Like they get agitated.
I've had a couple of close calls where I got too close with a moose that had a calf, and luckily, most of the times they'll take off. Uh, but it's just, I just got lucky. I'm just like, oh, thank God they went that way and not towards me. I think a lot of times it's like if you get between the mother and the baby, that's bad news. But for the most part, if the mother can, run away and the baby will follow, that's the course of action will take. But you never know. And I'm several times I've accidentally like walked up on a moose and been like, oh no, there's a moose. And then, he takes off or she takes off and then the baby takes off. And I'm like, oh, thank God. Cause I didn't know they had a baby. So,
man, I've seen those like horror story videos of those things like running down the street where, it'll just be like a neighborhood, kind of like how you're describing where you live. And then, one will get spooked and then it'll just start taking off down the street and it'll like, take out a bunch of collateral damage on the way, taking out a bunch of car windows, like smashing the tops of cars, like totaling cars. Like,
yeah. And, people will, haze them, they'll get in their garden and they'll be eating their tree or their plant or whatever. And people shoot BBs at them or shoot them with slingshots. And I understand, like, you don't want them to destroy your property, but at the same time, you agitate them and then you send them down the road and then they're pissed off and somebody gets in their way and, that could ruin somebody else's day.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back. And we are back. So let's hop right in. And it seems like just like Sasquatch, like everything seems like it's a little bit more agitated up in Alaska. And I haven't been up there, so I don't know exactly what the reason might be. But I mean, even like the Sasquatch phenomenon, man, it seems like it's a lot more aggressive in Alaska than it is anywhere else.
Well, I think pretty much. I mean, I'm a flesh and blood guy when it comes to Bigfoot. I mean, I'm not completely like, oh no, they're just animals and that's all they are. Like I think that we live in a really strange place, and I think that there's a lot of things that go on that we don't understand. But for right now, I'm sticking with the flesh and blood theory, and I think like any animals, if you're a threat to their food, or a threat to their young, or a threat to their territory, it could turn out bad for you. And people all the time run afoul of moose and bear. And I think that the same circumstances would probably apply to anything like a Sasquatch. If they perceive you as a threat to their young or a food source or even just, a territory, they may be hostile.
And I mean, I think that even the people that want to take in the intelligence factor to it too, I mean, people are still animalistic at their roots too. So even if this thing is more intelligent, if you infringe upon its basic instincts or morals, then it's going to act primal, just like, again, even a person would. Like, you get in the way of a person and their kid, they're going to go evil on you too. Like,
reach for my French fries and see what happens.
Exactly, you're going to get bit. So, of course, going up to Alaska, and you already had this interest in monsters and everything. What kind of took that step where you really wanted to start diving into like the Alaskan Sasquatch, where it got to the point where you actually wanted to start a podcast and even write books about it?
Well, I was here for a while before I really before it clicked. I was in the military up here, and then I got out and I went to work for a really remote police department called St. Paul Island. And if you ever watch The Deadliest Catch, that's where they offload the crabs sometime in the Bering Sea. And it's an island. It's about 12 miles by 8 miles wide, and I can confidently say there's no Bigfoot there. Although they have found mammoth bones there, which is interesting. But I was living and working out there for a long time, so I couldn't really do the Bigfoot cryptid thing out there. Just it's an island. There's no sightings. They did have some like little people stories out there, but for the most part, that was like a pause point in my cryptid hunting career, I guess you'd say. And
when you say little people, were you talking about like the people who describe them straight as gnomes, or more of like the Native Americans' description of like the little people?
Like the Native Americans.
Gotcha. Because it's like you hear the gnome ones, and sometimes they're just really out of place. So I feel like the little people ones, at least in North America, just seem a lot more. They catch my interest more. I don't want to say that anybody's story is necessarily believable, but if somebody describes like how the natives describe like this little primitive looking person versus like, oh man, I saw this little guy come out with a little red hat. Like, You're a little bit more like, I kind of want to hear more about the other one first.
Yeah. Well, they were big on the ghosts out there and belief in spirits. They would say, like, if somebody thought they had a ghost in their house, they'd say, "Oh, we had a visitor the other night." And they're very. It's hard to get a lot of stories out of them until you're kind of ingratiated into the community. But they were scared of the little people. I had a gentleman that I worked with, and him and his wife were out driving around one night, and she was a native girl that had grown up there on St. Paul Island. And there's the town, and then there's the airport, and then there's nothing else like on the island. There's no other buildings or structures. It's pretty much just nothing. There's not really any trees either. It's just
Just a big open space.
open, like look, and they've got really beautiful cliffs there. They have the puffins there. Like, people come there and bird watch. That's about the only kind of tourism they see. But they were driving around one night and they saw lights like up on one of the hills off in the distance. And her husband was like, "What is that? Like, there's nobody up there. There's nothing supposed to be up there." And he wanted to get closer and see what it was. And she freaks out and she's like, "Nope, nope, that's the little people. Like, we got to get out of here. Like, if we don't, they're gonna get us." And basically got so upset that he was like, "Okay, we're gonna leave." So I mean, it's definitely something that they still worry about, today. And I never saw anything like that while I was out there. But I didn't spend a lot of time outside of town either. I was paid to be there to be the town cop, and there wasn't really a lot to do outside of town other than just drive out to the end of the road and turn around and come back. But yeah, it's really interesting when you start listening to their stories and their culture. And then I was out there for 3 years, and then got hired at the Homer Police Department, which is on the road system, which means you can drive here from the lower 48. Like, St. Paul is not on the road system, obviously. It's an island. And, that's how, when I started in law enforcement, that's kind of how it was you went to go work for a remote community, and they would send you to the academy and get you all trained up. And then kind of after you finished your contract with them, then you get to go work in a bigger city, like on the road system. And so I came to work for Homer, and that's kind of when my interest got picked back up. I was on the Kenai Peninsula. Kenai Peninsula has, a pretty storied past with Bigfoot. When it comes to Port Chatham and some other areas here on the peninsula, there's stories out of Seward. There's stories out of the Kenai National Wildlife Refuge. So that's when I kind of started getting back into it. And I went on a hike in the wildlife refuge, and I found a footprint. It looked like a right, or a left footprint with like a big toe. And that's kind of what got me on my, like, holy cow, like, what is it? It wasn't a bear track. I've seen enough bear tracks to know what they look like. And I was like, what in the hell left that? And it was kind of just this one single footprint, kind of off by itself, kind of pressed down into the tundra. And I went back to that area with my wife, and we were walking around there, and we had something as we were leaving. We heard these big, like, thumps, this thump, 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 and the ground kind of shook. And we never did find out what it was. Like, I was like, I'm going to go see what that is. And of course she's like, "Oh no, why don't you come back?" And so that was like almost in the exact same area where I found that track. And that just like lit a fire under me. I was like, okay, like, there's something to this. I'm gonna look into it a little bit more. And that's kind of when I started looking up the sightings in the area and talking to people, and idea for the podcast started. And it just kind of lit a fire under me. And it's like, man, I want to know what that was. Like, what is it? Is it an animal? Is it something else? I think that they're probably certainly in and around that area, but the problem is the area is so huge. It's like, you just throw a dart at a map and be like, well, maybe they're over there today. And I mean, maybe they will be, maybe they won't. They've got plenty of room. If they don't want to be around people, they don't have to be. And that's one of the big challenges about up here in Alaska, about looking for stuff like that and being a researcher, is, I mean, you can go to an area where there's been sightings and reports, but I mean, if they don't want to be there, they certainly don't have to be. I mean, there's plenty of room for them to roam and go other places. Whereas I think in the lower 48, you get more like choke points where like, okay, maybe it's between this town and this town, and there's this area here, and they might be concentrated in there, and you might have like better luck and more activity. Whereas up here, I mean, it's a literal just needle in a haystack.
Yeah, I was going to say down here, it's like you have this little wooded area and then towns all around it. And if you see sightings all the way around, then you know it's in that center area. Up there, it's like you see a sighting and then it's just miles and miles of woods going out that way. So it's like, all right, it may have been over here today, but it's somewhere back there now.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, well, I've got 8 miles. Like here's the area I'm going to look at today. And all this is, I can only go 4 or 5 miles probably before I hit terrain that I can't cross, like marsh or something like that. And then beyond that marshland, there's like 8 miles of forest. And then there's a mountain that even if I could get to it, I couldn't get over it. And then on the other side of that mountain is just more, miles and miles of forest. So it's pretty daunting. It's like, man, a lot of times I go out and I don't find anything and nothing happens. And people are like, oh, well, you don't know what you're doing. And I'm like, no, I just, I'm like one dude searching an area probably the size of the state that you live in.
I mean, even Alex, man, he was going to that one specific cabin, and he was saying like the biggest thing that really happened was just getting that handprint that one time that like showed up on like a higher spot on the side of the cabin. But I mean, that place was like known for sightings. And again, it's just so vast that people think that, oh, you're going to be able to run into Sasquatch because they're everywhere. But not considering on the other side that it's so vast that you're lucky to run into them because, again, like you said, there's just so many different places they could potentially be. It's not a matter of like if they're in the area, it's just a matter of like where they are in the area.
Yeah. And I actually am the one that swabbed that handprint for DNA. So,
oh, yeah. Even I think Alex was the one who told me, I was like sitting next to you all day at Small Town Monster Fest, and I came over and talked to Alex, and he's like, "Oh, have you talked to Beans yet?" And I'm like, "No, I haven't actually." And he was like, "Oh, he lives up in Alaska." He's like, kind of went over the rundown with you, and that's when I walked up, and I'm like, "Hey, I'm sorry, I haven't talked to you today."
Yeah, and well, I was there by myself too, so it's harder for me to get away and talk to people. But
that's how I felt. I had like my co-host and everything, but he's more the social butterfly type. So I was at the table, so I was kind of like focusing on people walking up, and I didn't get much of a chance to interact too much with even just the people sitting next to me, unfortunately, until towards the end when it started kind of lighting it up a little bit.
Yeah, but no, I went out there and swabbed the handprint, and we sent it to Doug Hychek, who I believe he sent it to Darby Orcutt. I'm not sure. I know he's getting it tested, and I'm not sure when those results will be revealed. I don't know what they are yet. I told my wife, I was like, if it comes back as something good, we're gonna get some champagne. But I have high hopes for that. I hope I'm not disappointed. Because I've been out there before to the cabin, and just the placement of it is so bizarre. It was like right above I'm 5'11", and it was kind of like right above my head height, and it's kind of hard to explain, but the cabin is here, and then there's a big, like, as soon as you get behind the cabin, like, it just, there's a big hill behind it, and there's a water tank right in front of where the handprint was. So for something to like lean over and touch that area, I mean, we can't figure out how it happened unless something was like really tall. Like it had to be like 8 feet tall.
See, that's kind of how Alex was explaining it too, was that it may not have been anything like super duper crazy, but it was just the weird placement of it that it wouldn't have made sense. And again, the area being so remote, he described that you had to like drive in, then you had to take a boat off after a certain area. So it's like the only people that are around were like the people that were actually there doing it. So there wouldn't have been like some accidental, somebody came by and, accidentally touched something up high or anything like that. It was just you guys there.
Yeah. And that's the bizarre thing about it is like, I think it was the year before we found the handprint. They were doing some work. They were putting gutters in on the cabin. And I remember because I was helping them do it. And I mean, that was like over a year before. So I can't see somebody putting their hand there, and then it's set there for over a year until Alex noticed it. And, they had rain, and it rains a lot there. All the rain and the snow and the wind. And you're telling me that like this this like slimy handprint sat there for over a year because it had faded from the time Alex found it to the time that I came out to swab it. It had faded some, like it was not as prominent. I mean, I could still certainly see it, but it was definitely had degraded some, and you know, the quality of it as far as you can see it. So I don't think it had been there very long when Alex found it.
The hard part about it too is that it's like, even if you collect it and it ends up being something weird, it's like, I feel like everybody that ends up getting that like biological evidence, they end up, you know, saying like, oh, it has part human DNA and then the other half is whatever DNA, and then they just throw it out after that. And it's like, I don't feel like they really go past it much more than that, unfortunately. So it's like, you know, we could have some of these answers already, but it's just a matter of like, once they find that weird thing, they're kind of just like, all right, this is what it is. Here you go, done with it.
Yeah, I've had that thought before too. Because I've often wondered, like, well, if it comes back and it's like they just say, well, it's human. Like, is that the final? Is that it? Am I just gonna be like, oh yeah, well, I guess it was just like one of those. I guess it was somebody's handprint left over from when we were like working on the gutters or something. It just doesn't make any sense to me. It just seems, I don't know.
See, it's one of those things too, where it's kind of like all the hidden history stuff, that it's not necessarily that people are like conspiring against you and they're trying to hide all of this stuff. It's also partly just the fact of like, you know, if this person is a scientist and they accidentally prove the existence of like Sasquatch, like they may be afraid of like what their peers might think. So if they find something weird, it's not that they're conspiring against you to hide the information. It's more so just like, all right, I don't want to touch this because I don't know what it's going to end up doing for my reputation.
Well, it's Occam's razor too. I mean, what are they going to say? Are they going to say, well, you know, more than likely it came back, you know, as some human DNA, or, you know, there was some human DNA present. So it was either contamination or it was a human handprint, or it's this, you know, creature that nobody can get like a picture of, you know, like, well, what's more likely, you know, I mean, obviously it's more likely to be human, and they're not going to say like, well, it could be Bigfoot.
Yeah, it's up to us to try to figure it out. Because again, the only results we ever get is female DNA with unknown male DNA, and then that's the extent of it. And then it's like, what do you do past that? Because it's like, you don't really have anything to compare it to until you actually have like a physical Sasquatch. But at the same time, though, if that physical Sasquatch DNA comes up the same, like you might have already found the end of what you're going to find, because that unknown male DNA, the original predecessor, may not exist anymore.
Yeah, well, I've always said, you know, it's going to take a body to like prove it, and I think it was Doug Hychek I was talking to, and he said, I'll do you one better. He says, I think it's going to take two bodies, because if you're just one body, they'll just say, oh, well, that's the last one.
Or they're going to do the thing like the aliens that they're doing down in Mexico, where they're like, here's a body, and they're going to make it look really, really cheesy so that people are going to go, I don't believe that.
But yeah, I think he might be onto a point there, because if you're like, oh, well, I guess this was just the last one. This is just an anomaly, you know, like it's a missing link here. And if you don't have like a male and a female, or maybe like a female and a juvenile, then, you know, people will say like, well, there's probably not a sustainable breeding population left. So we're pretty confident to say this is the last one, and we're just going to study this one and then call it good.
We will be right back after this brief commercial break, so stay tuned. And we are back, so let's hop right in. I'm assuming you probably heard the whole like Minnesota Iceman conspiracy, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I've heard it was real, but then like there was a dummy made because the original like got stolen or rotted away, and I've heard all kinds of stuff about it.
Yeah, I heard the purposeful, like, it went missing and then this new one got replaced in, and like the guy that owned it was like looking at it like, no, that isn't right. It doesn't look the same. Like it was some like a Smithsonian cover-up type of thing, where I feel like that's a lot more believable than like this grand scheme cover-up. It's more so just the academics trying to hide certain things because it's going to ruin the narrative, and it's more so trying to also just protect the founding fathers of their research's names, because if you disprove theories that people have been saying for 100 years, then all of those people are just going to get dropped out of history. So it's like they don't want to knock their predecessors out either, so they just kind of leave that information alone, and they just take up the stuff that they can so that it doesn't come out to the public. Because even the giant thing, it's like almost undeniable at this point that there was some type of like giant human. You know, it may not have been like what people made it out to be in all the stories and everything like that, but there was definitely something, and there was this huge weird cover up that happened afterwards, like purposefully, and now it's like, in the United States, you don't ask any questions because nobody knows anything to it. But, if you go down to South America, I've heard from a bunch of different researchers that they still have some of these giant skeletons on display at certain museums.
Yeah. Well, I've worked for the government pretty much my entire adult life. And, I've heard every type of conspiracy theory that I can, imagine. And there's a quote that I really like that I think is pretty apt, and it says, "Never attribute to malice that which can be explained by ignorance." And I think that a lot of things that have been done, by researchers and the government and stuff like that, it's not necessarily where they're like, twirling their mustache, like, ha ha ha, like, we're going to cover this up or this will show them. I think it's more like, this is going to make us look kind of silly. So, let's just, let's just forget about that. Like, we don't know what we're dealing with. So let's talk about something we do know.
Yeah. Especially with like the Egypt stuff, for example, like people came and then they had their set established, like, I'm an Egyptologist. This is the theories behind it, all of this. And now we're getting into like the weirder side of Egypt. And it's like, nobody wants to knock their names out of history. So it's just this like weird, I don't want to say protected secret. Like, it makes it sound a lot more conspiratorial than it is. It's just a matter of like not having to rewrite everything that you've already been saying for years and basically destroying even your foundation of research that got you up to the point where you feel like you're somebody that has the professional opinion to speak on this topic. Because if that's all completely rewritten, it's like your professional opinion at that point doesn't necessarily mean anything because your background wasn't necessarily like how things were.
Yeah, and I mean, all these dates keep getting pushed back. They're like, oh, well, this was this old, and now it's this old, and now it's this old, and it's like eventually, like, they're gonna have to like change some narratives if all this, if all these dates keep changing. But I don't know, man. Like I said, we live in a strange world, and I think there's a lot of stuff out there we don't necessarily understand, and hopefully, Bigfoot's one of them.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah.
And, we kind of talked a little bit about you actually going out to that location with Alex and stuff, but I assume that not everybody necessarily has an encounter unless you do have one, but I'm sure that you've had a lot of other experiences going out on squatch hikes, finding different trace evidence and stuff. So, like, what are some of your, like, favorite experiences that you've had while going out and squatching and investigating?
Well, my favorite happened in 2018 when we were in Port Chatham, and we were walking through this area. It was kind of an open field area, and the girl, Mary Beth, that was with us, that was filming a documentary with us, she's kind of like, man, I feel like we're being watched. Well, I bust out my thermal and start scanning the tree line, and I see this thing, and of course, everybody that's with us in our group is either with us or behind us. There's nobody in front of us. We're in Port Chatham, Alaska. You can't drive there. There's nobody else there. We're the only boat in the bay. And I see this thing. It kind of looks like Donkey Kong from N64. Like, imagine his silhouette. It's got kind of like a conical head, wide shoulders, and then it tapers down, and I can't see individual legs. It just tapers down into like a thinner waist and legs. And he's doing this. He's like waving its arms up and down. And we're filming a documentary about Bigfoot. I'm there to look for Bigfoot. I see something in my thermal off and go, look over there. What do you see? And I handed it to one of the production assistant. He was the brother of the cameraman, and he was a young kid. He's in his 20s. And he looks and he goes, it looks like a dude. And so they're passing the thermal around, and I'm like, what the hell is that? And eventually makes its way back to me, and I'm like, well, maybe I should document this. So we start like walking towards it. I hit record. Well, by this time it has like moved back a little bit, and I did end up getting it on thermal, but it was not the initial image that I saw. It was like more distorted. It was a blob squatch by that point, obviously. But I think about it, man. I'm like, because I used to be really critical of people that was like, oh, I saw it, and I had my camera, and I didn't get a picture, and I was like, yeah, right, whatever. And then it happened to me, and I'm like, yeah, I guess that's the thing, like the curse of Sasquatch, they call it, where it's Murphy's Law. Like, things go wrong at the exact time that, they can go wrong.
That's one of those things, too, that when you're having an experience, you're kind of just in the moment. And it's like you're thinking about recording because you're obviously out there filming a documentary. But at the same time, though, you're just like, holy crap, look at what we're seeing right now. And it's like, you're just trying to share the experience with everybody that's around. And again, you forget to actually hit record because you're just trying to get confirmation even in your own mind that you're not just seeing something.
Yeah. I wish I'd hit record. If I had, it would probably be, I mean, I don't want to say it would be up there with a PG film, but it would probably be one of the best like thermal recordings ever captured. And so we started going in that direction and we never caught up with it. I don't know where it went. And, Steven, the guy that was with us, he says he was later. He says he saw something go between two trees in an area not too far from there. I don't know if it was the same thing or not, but that's probably my favorite. And, it's the one I can't really explain. Like, I know it was nobody in our crew. There was nobody else out there. It wasn't a bear. Bears have, cute, fuzzy little floppy ears and they don't have shoulders.
It was a bear doing the wave, right? That's the most logical thing to explain that it is. It's a bear doing the wave.
Yeah.
He's trying to cheer you guys on.
I don't think I've ever seen a bear raise its hands above its head. I don't think they're physically capable of it.
Which is really funny because a lot of the old pictures you see that are like, the old hunters getting attacked by a bear, that's always the pose.
Yeah. That's an interesting observation. There might be something to that.
Makes it look scarier. I think that's what it is. Because it's like, it's a fisherman's story. When people retell getting attacked by a bear, of course it's horrifying, but you also add in your fear to the retelling of it, and you want it to fit how you feel in that experience. And it looks scary when it's on top of you like this.
But anyway, we spent the rest of our time there, and we had a couple of little things happen, but that was for me, that was like the big thing. I did find a really interesting, I think it was a 14-inch print, but it was almost like a Rorschach test where we were following these tracks up the beach where something had been on the beach, like the rocks were like disturbed, but you couldn't tell what it was. And then when we got up to where it turned into woods, where it became forest, I looked down and I'm like, holy crap, like that looks like a 12-inch footprint right there, or 14-inch, I'm sorry. And then I'd have everybody come over and look, and some people were like, oh yeah, look at that, there's toes. And then other people came over and was like, I don't see anything. So it was almost like a Rorschach test. But that was a really interesting experience. And then we went back in 2019 with the Travel Channel and did the Alaska Triangle episode. And it seemed like it was a lot. The activity was less, and the environment was a lot more hostile. We made the joke. We get off the boat and go onto shore. And every time we made the decision, like, okay, I think there's a break in the weather, let's go. As soon as we would get on the boat, like the weather would get worse. And we started joking around like, oh, somebody doesn't want us here. And by like the fourth day, I was like, this place is cursed. We're going to die. There's something to it, because it was uncanny. Like the law of averages, like every time we tried to go ashore to film, the weather would just get terrible.
And you brought up the Alaskan Triangle. Like this location that you were filming in, was it within that area?
Well, the Alaska Triangle kind of waxes and wanes depending on the production company and where they want it to be. In my opinion, it's not in the Alaska Triangle. I think the Alaska Triangle encompasses mostly the what is it, the Tongass National Forest, or it's kind of in the central part of the state, kind of toward the central east part, almost toward the southeast. I don't think that this area actually falls into the OG original Alaska Triangle.
And just out of curiosity, too, I've had Mike Rickseckler talk about the Alaskan Triangle like a very long time ago, but it was extremely brief. I always like to get people's perspective on it because I don't get to talk to a lot of people from Alaska. For anybody that may not be familiar with what the Alaskan Triangle phenomenon is exactly and what kind of how it kind of started, why don't you give them a little bit of a background coming from somebody that kind of knows the area?
Yeah. Well, the Alaska Triangle, it's kind of like the equivalent of the Bermuda Triangle, only instead of boats going missing, it's people, a lot of people. And it's just an area where a lot of people go missing and disappear. And, I'm a little bit of a fuddy-duddy on that. I think that a lot of the missing people in Alaska, like we were saying earlier, like we've got moose, we've got bear, and then the weather, the environment to contend with. There are so many things in Alaska that can kill you without even including like Bigfoot or Dogman or anything like that. I think probably a lot of those people probably just succumb to natural everyday deaths. I don't really necessarily think there's anything paranormal or supernatural about them. I think that there's a lot of things here. Like you can get locked out of your house and die. I mean, the environment is, Alaska's a harsh mistress. She's beautiful and she'll take care of you, but she'll turn on you pretty quick if you're not careful.
Do you think that that's where a lot of the like native legends of like missing women and everything came from too, was just the landscape itself? Or do you think that it was like something that's kind of transitioned where, back in the day, maybe there was a lot more like Sasquatch encounters and that's where a lot of this kind of stuff stemmed from. And then today's phenomenon is just more so, people that are unexperienced, or even some people that are experienced, that you just end up making like little mistakes and then ends up leading into, the inevitable. Just being out in the environment and just not knowing exactly what they're doing. Because I feel like there's a lot of tourists that come up there and they want to see the beautiful landscapes and everything like that. And obviously they're probably just, even if you're a hiker that's from down south, like being up there in the cold and hiking through the snow and everything, it's just a totally different monster. And it's like, you can be prepared for one and be professional at one, but when you try to transition into the other one, like it's a totally different ballpark.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just in last week, we had here, not too far from where I live, we had two different sets of hunters that had to be rescued by the Coast Guard. One, their tent got destroyed. It didn't say how. I was kind of curious to understand. I wish I knew. I wish I had expanded on the article a little bit more and talked about how their tent got destroyed. I don't know if if the wind got it or a bear tore it up or what. And then there was another one what was his deal? He had fallen into a creek or something and gotten wet and couldn't self-extract, and they had to go get him. And luckily, I think you're seeing less mysterious deaths like that with the advent of like the satellite communications, the satellite phones. I have a Garmin inReach that I carry everywhere with me, and I think you're seeing more like close calls like that where people actually get rescued. Whereas if they didn't have anything like that on them, and then they succumbed to the elements, or they died, or they were never found, it would be, oh my gosh, like what happened to these people? But to your question about like native legends and stuff, I think that probably, they say here on the Kenai Peninsula, they say the Nantinaq, which is the local natives, their version of Bigfoot. They say he comes when it's foggy, and he shouldn't go outside when it's foggy because the Nantinaq comes. And it's like, well, does he really, is there really a creature that shows up when it's foggy, or is it hard to see and people like fall in the rocks and fall in the water and die? Like, is it just a cautionary tale to keep people away from dangerous situations, or is there really something to it? It's hard to say. Like I personally, I'm kind of on the fence about it. I mean, given some of the things I've seen and experienced, I do tend to think that Bigfoot exists and he's real, but at the same time, like, man, it's like all these creatures, all these Bigfoot, they're after our women and our children, and so we got to keep our women and children safe. It's almost like an archetype thing where it's like, all right, we got to keep these kids from wandering out in the woods. Tell them the hairy man's going to get them, to keep them safe. So I don't know, but then also, there's a grain of truth in a lot of legends and stereotypes and stuff like that. So who knows?
Hold that thought. We'll be right back. And we are back, so let's hop right in. Because, I mean, on the other side of that, too, it's like, well, one, with the Native American stories as a whole, like, there's so much stuff that's written in metaphor that you never necessarily know how to take a story, because I feel like there's a lot of stuff that's very literal, and then there's a lot of stuff that's very metaphorical. It's just a matter of how you want to decipher it, I guess. And a lot of it's obviously oral tradition and stuff that's kind of kept within the tribe. So it's like, you don't have anybody that's telling you like, oh yeah, this is completely legitimate and this one is more of like a metaphor and stuff. But like you were kind of saying, like stuff kind of being stemmed out of truth, of course, everybody's fear for the protector is having your family taken from you, your female and your kids and everything. But on the other side, like looking at it from like a Sasquatch perspective, females, obviously you have the whole genetic thing like we were talking about earlier, where obviously they had the interest in the female DNA. And assumably if they are some type of hominid, they're of course going to be interested in like other females that are kind of within their same like structure and everything. And as far as the kids go and everything, it's like they're not really a danger. Like they're more so the Sasquatch beings. I think they're curious, and that's why a lot of the stuff will happen with kids, is because they're not necessarily intending to hurt them. It's just that they're the innocent ones that they know aren't going to hurt them or anything. But on the logic side of speaking, like there's not necessarily like a reason for a Sasquatch to kidnap a male, because the male is going to come in and it's going to try to attack and it's going to try to run. It's going to try to do this. So it's like, there's not a reason for them to try to snatch up a male, you know, unless maybe they think it's like a kid or it's hurt or they want to help it and stuff like that. But I mean, I think that's where the grain of truth kind of came from, was just the fact of like curiosity of the females and the children, and there just wasn't necessarily a reason to take the males.
There's a legend from the interior, from further north. I believe it's Yupik, but I could be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure it's Yupik, of a woman that was kidnapped by Bigfoot, and they took her to a cave, and there were other Bigfoot in the cave, but there was one that was hurt. And they somehow, you know, they're like pointing at the one that's hurt. And somehow or another, she figures it out. She's like, oh, they want me to help it. So she, you know, goes and collects some medicine, you know, some medicinal herbs and stuff. And she does her thing on the sick Bigfoot. And eventually it gets better. And then the Bigfoot that kidnapped her took her home, or like dropped her off outside her village. So, you know, that, I mean, is it true or not? I don't know. It's an interesting story. And there's been, you know, similar stories like that where they take somebody to a cave and, you know, they see other Bigfoots in the cave, you know. I'm not sure that I buy into the Albert Ostman story, but, you know, they always seem to have a proclivity for taking women and children. It seems like there's a name. It's similar to Nantinaq, but it's used by the Denina people. And I know somebody's going to be like, it's not Denina, it's Denina. I get it. Every time I try and pronounce a native word, somebody will go, I'll say like Denina, and they'll go, no, it's Denina. I'm like, I think that's pretty much what I just said, but so I just assume I'm going to butcher the name. But
I got to a point where I just spell stuff now when I'm doing like the words that I have no idea. I'm like, I'm not even going to attempt this. This is how it's spelled, and then I'll continue on.
So it's called the Nantinaq, which they said, the Denina people say that means the ones that steal us.
Which is weirdly a very fitting name, of course. That's almost like kind of creepy to really think about, that's like where that name actually stems from.
Yeah, I mean, there's an animal out there that basically they call it the kidnapper. You know, like that's what it's known for. You know, it's like so that's kind of creepy. And it always seems like, yeah, they're always focused on women and children. It seems like for the most part, when it comes to men, you know, they're a little maybe territorial. We'll try and run them out, scare them off. Maybe a little curiosity mixed in there where you hear them coming through camps and looking at stuff or making noise.
You know, guys definitely like to pee in the woods too. So I'm kind of curious if that's where something comes in where, you know, you're just going on a hike and you just innocently go off on the trail and you got to take a piss real quick. But to a Sasquatch, they see that and they see these males that are on the bigger size of our species walking through their woods and peeing everywhere. They're probably thinking it's like a territorial, like, all right, let's fight. Or if it's like a kid that runs around and pees somewhere, it's like it's, you know, they're four times this kid's height. Like they're not seeing it as some territorial thing.
Yeah. And well, when you look at the story of Port Chatham, if there was ever like a perfect storm for an aggressive Bigfoot, I think Port Chatham is probably it. Because, you know, if you look at Port Chatham and Portlock so Port Chatham's the name of the bay and Portlock was the name of the town. And I use them interchangeably, as do the people around here. A lot of people say it was a town called Port Chatham and a town called Portlock. That's not true. But if you look at Port Chatham, I mean, it's at the very southern tip of the Kenai Peninsula. So it's, I mean, you can't go any, you know, you're already as far south. You can't go any south any further, you know, like that's it. It's the end of the line. They're cutting down all the trees, you know, they're logging to make the fish traps. They're fishing with the fish traps, catching all the fish. So they're right there, you know, they're taking a food source. They're literally taking the environment. And in my mind, I mean, that's like, okay, well, if there was ever a reason for a Bigfoot to be pissed off at people, that would be it.
Mm-hmm. And of course, I'm assuming this is kind of what led into everything for your book too.
Yeah, I mean, that's, you know, the legend of Port Chatham. So there's a little fishing village at the southern tip of the Kenai Peninsula. It was established in the early 1900s, and by 1950 it was abandoned. And the legend says is that it was abandoned because the hairy man, an Antinok, chased everybody out of town. And I mean, it's there. It kind of runs the gamut to Bigfoot chased everybody away to there were like it was a Bigfoot massacre. And
Like the Bigfoots were massacring people, you mean?
yeah, yeah. So, like everything, like we were saying earlier, there's a grain of truth in every, in a lot of things. And two things can be true at the same time. So, I did a lot of research into it. And from what I found, like Bigfoot did not chase everybody away. It was more economic reasons. But there is a long history of Bigfoot type activity there, sightings, and, some other weird stuff, almost like Skinwalker Ranch type stuff. And, this all was going on. I had there's a really interesting encounter in my book from a gentleman in the 20s. I believe it's 1923. I could be flubbing that date, but it was in the 20s, where he said he saw a Bigfoot walking down the beach carrying a club. And what's interesting about that is like that happened in the 20s, like way before PG film, way before like Jerry Crew. Like Bigfoot wasn't even a thing really in modern America. Like it hadn't hit our even lexicon. So all this stuff was happening up here before Bigfoot was even a thing down in the lower 48. And then, you get the kind of a bad vibe around the place. There were some mysterious deaths. I did a lot of research into those deaths. I tried to get birth certificates. I tried to get names, and it's like really the only one that I could like confirm. Well, I couldn't really even confirm it because I couldn't get his death certificate. But family members said that Andrew Camlock died under mysterious circumstances. And it was funny because I was talking to the lady at the state records department, and I'm trying to get this guy's death certificate because I'm like, man, if I could get his death certificate and it said his cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, like that would confirm the story. And this lady, I found his son's death certificate, but I couldn't find his death certificate. And I'm talking to this lady, and she's like, have you tried maybe looking at the local police department? And I'm like, no, lady, they don't have it. Trust me.
I am the local police department.
She didn't know I worked there, but I was like, oh, no, they don't have it. But yeah, that was interesting. And that's like, why can't we find his death certificate? But, people don't understand a lot of times with the way Bush, Alaska works. And especially, you got to realize this is before Alaska was a state. So
I mean, even record keeping previous to like the 1940s wasn't what you think it is. You think they'd have everything as paper, but if there's a fire and at some point anything, it's like it's lost forever and that's it.
Exactly. Well, this is before statehood, so there's probably no iron grip on record keeping. There's probably like no rules that they're necessarily following from the federal government. And these are Alaska villages. Like if you've ever been to a village, like you'll understand. But like you were saying, you're like, hey, do you guys have like these records from so-and-so? And they're like, no, they were out in the storage shed, and 2 winters ago, the snow load collapsed the roof, and then, everything got wet and we threw it away. I mean, it happens everywhere all the time in these villages like that. And they just, it's just gone. What are you going to do? It's just gone. So.
And just out of curiosity, so did you end up finding anything that may have actually linked Sasquatch to it other than, just people telling stories and stuff? Because, I mean, even on the other side of it, I mean, you hear about all these different stories about when they try to build new areas or they're trying to build a road through a certain area that they'll have these just like random accidents that'll happen. Not like anything like killing people or anything, but like they'll come back the following day and they'll have like their trucks flipped, or they'll have like part of the road pulled back up or part of a bridge ripped up and stuff. Like, did you find anything relatively close to that in your research where it may not have been like a swarm of Sasquatch, but just like property being damaged, stuff like that?
So really, I mean, with Andrew Camlock, he allegedly was killed with a big piece of equipment was too heavy for a man to lift. And like I said, I couldn't find his death certificate. I couldn't find any like basically legal confirmation of that. But that is basically what his family, says. The people that are descendants of him, that's like what they say. Whether it's, true or not, I don't know. Like I said, I can't find the actual paperwork for it. But I never found anything that said like, oh, Bigfoot did this or Bigfoot did that. There was the basically the workers' strike, and I want to say it was like 19, was it 16 or something like that, when the town basically, the workers in the fish processing plant basically said, hey, if you guys don't do something about this creature in the woods, we're going to walk. And the owners caved and hired some like Pinkerton types, like security, to come in and basically like patrol around the town, because they said the Nantidoc was coming into town and bothering them. That phrase can mean a lot of different things. If you know anybody that's ever like worked in a village or something, if somebody calls and says, "Hey, this guy was bothering me," like there's a lot of different meanings behind that. It can mean everything from like sexual assault to trying to hurt you. So, but that's what I heard, was that the Nantidoc was coming into town and bothering the townsfolk. So there was, I guess, some documentation that happened, that they actually like threatened to quit. I don't think that the Bigfoot was necessarily like bothering the industry of the town. I think it was more like the people in the town. It was really like, it was set up very much like a old coal mining town, like from where I'm from, like in Kentucky, where the same family, they own the processing plant, they own the sawmill, they own the store, and people were basically like, you went to the company store to get what you needed, and they had their own like little fiefdom set up there. And from what I found, the sawmill burned down, and they didn't have any insurance, and they just packed up and left. They didn't rebuild, and that's kind of what led to the town basically dying off. They took the jobs away, and the people left to go find work elsewhere. And basically all went to the town. When they left, the infrastructure left, because they owned everything. And that basically killed the town. I've heard a lot of different crazy rumors. My favorite one is that the highway was finished around that time, connecting like Homer to Anchorage, and that's why it killed Port Chatham. But that's ludicrous, because there's still 3 villages across the bay. There's like Seldovia, Nanwallock, and Port Graham. Like, why are they still there if the highway killed Port Chatham? It doesn't make any sense.
See, I kind of wonder sometimes too, if not to discredit anybody's like experiences or anything like that, but with all these like old mining towns, with all these old like lumber towns, all this kind of stuff, I'm kind of curious if when they are failing, if they'll just kind of throw up some kind of story so that they're still making a mark on history, I guess, a little bit with the town, where, it may not be that it became this full booming town like the original people that founded the town wanted it to be, but, at least it's still going to be remembered for being like the creepy ghost town or this or that. Or even on the other side, though, I mean, there's definitely people that are going to tell creepy stories once they come across these places, but the ones like this coming directly from the family, I'm kind of curious if either one, it was a full experience that they had, or two, if they were just trying to still leave some type of interesting name and story and all of that still behind the town.
Well, I think hold on, let me hit this before I forget it. One of the interesting things about Port Chatham, and I think one of the reasons that this legend has legs to it, basically, is taken off like it has, is when a lot of those towns die, they die because the resources are gone. The mines played out. All the timber's cut. Like the resources are gone, so the town dies. Port Chatham wasn't necessarily that way. There's still plenty of timber there to cut. The fish were still there. They just decided not to rebuild the sawmill and left. In fact, they opened up, I think it was I can't remember if it's called the Portlock. I think it's called the Portlock Canning Company down in Seattle. That's where they went. But I think probably, because I've talked to people that live here today, and in the area, and the native people, it's almost like a 50-50 split. Some of them you talk to are like, dude, there's, it's just a bunch of stories. There's nothing to it. And some people are like, that place is absolutely evil. And, me or my cousin or, somebody that I know, saw something there, and you should stay away from there. And it's almost, a 50-50 split down the native community as to, whether that place is really evil or not.
We will be right back after this brief commercial break, so stay tuned. Hey guys, I know nobody really wants to listen to ad breaks on podcasts, so instead of actually listening to those, why don't you go and check out some of the sponsors and affiliate links for the show instead? Number one, you guys can go and check out IKNOWSQUATCH for all of your squatchy gear needs, or you guys can check out Cryptoteeology for all of your wearable cryptid favorites, or you guys can check out Snarly Yow for a fantastic natural line of beard oil, beard balm, beard shampoo, and body wash, all with an enticing woodsy aroma of smoky cedar with a hint of mint. And he also puts on a lot of fantastic events around the West Virginia area. So if you guys are in that area, make sure you guys go and check it out and see what kind of events he's putting on, because he definitely brings in an awesome group of people. And you guys can go and check out Big Ape Threads for all of their Bigfoot and cryptid related designs. And going into the affiliate links, you guys can always go and check out the newest sponsor to the show, Oregon-ite, specializing in scale model pyramid replicas, EMF protection devices, and much more. And if you guys find any pieces that you guys want to scoop for yourself, you guys can use code OMM for 10% off at checkout. And to all the paranormal investigators out there, you guys can go and check out the Chattergeist. It is the all-in-one paranormal investigating device. My absolute favorite. I use it every single time I go out. And if you guys have any technical questions about it, you guys can always go and hit up Barry over there in Dimension Devices on Instagram. He's the guy that programmed and developed it, so he'll be able to answer any of your guys' technical questions for it. And if you use the affiliate link, you guys will receive 10% off at checkout. And just a heads up, the company is based in the UK, so when you check it out on the website, it will be in pounds. But when you guys use PayPal, it will convert over. So don't think that you guys can't scoop one just because you don't live in the UK. And don't forget to check out the affiliate link for Sticker Mule to receive a $10 credit towards your first purchase. Over there, you can get a bunch of stickers printed, t-shirts, posters, all that kind of stuff. So if you guys are another podcast and you guys are looking for good quality stuff in order to print your logos on, Sticker Mule is definitely the place for you. And more information on all of those, of course, is available down in the show description. Let's quickly run through some commercials and get back into the show. And we are back, so let's hop right in. And I mean, kind of diving into like some of the native stuff too. Are there any, native legends that are relatively close to that area where they may kind of like tie in or kind of confirm, that there were Sasquatch in the area way before the settlers and stuff were kind of retelling the stories? Like, of course, like Alaska as a whole has its own stories, yeah. But was there anything that was like relatively close to there that was like a prolific story that seems like it kind of might tie in?
Well, I mean, there's the story of Mumchuck, the hunter. So they have a little bit more of mystical view of the Nantinaq. It's very similar to a lot of other native takes on the side. Like they have the Kushtaka in Southeast, which the Kushtaka will kidnap you and turn you into a Kushtaka. Well, the story of Mumchuck, he was a hunter. He was out with his party, and they're in the Badarka, their little boat, and they're floating around out here near Port Chatham. And he tells his hunting partners, he's like, "Hey, you guys need to drop me off in the woods. I'm going to go live with the Nantinaq and become a Nantinaq." And they're like, "Oh, stop fooling around. You don't talk about that," because they're big on the don't say it, don't talk about it, because if you do, it will call it to you. Which, if that was true, I would have a yard full of Nantinaqs, because I've probably said that word more than anybody else alive.
Yeah, just for good measure, just Sasquatch, 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 Sasquatch.
So finally he starts getting more rowdy, and finally they're like, "Okay, fine, whatever, like we're gonna drop." So they drop him off, and they go back to the village, and not too long after that, this Nantinaq, this Bigfoot, starts coming around the village, and I believe it was Dan Wallach. And this Nantinaq was Mumchuck. This is Mumchuck in like Nantinaq form. He's like, I mean, you can kind of tell it's him, but it's still, he's hairy and he can't really talk now. He's kind of like, "Woo." So Mumchuck finds one of his, the Nantinaq Mumchuck finds one of his hunting partners and basically tells him like, "Hey, I need you to tell my wife to stay in the house and not come out, or I'm going to get her. I'm going to take her in the woods and turn her into an Nantinaq." And so they went back to the village and told Mumchuck's wife, like, "Hey, you need to stay at home, or Mumchuck's going to like find you and he's going to take you and turn you into a Nantinaq." So, that was a story, before Port Chatham was ever a village. There's other stories where a hunter shot a Nantinaq with not a bow and arrow, but a spear or something. And the Nantinaq like jumped into a pile of bushes, and then the hunter runs over and he looks, and then there's like a mouse in the bushes that runs out, and he's like, the Nantinaq turned into a mouse. So apparently they can shapeshift. But yeah, there's all kinds of things from like before Port Chatham was here, or before Port Locke was founded. The craziest story, like the one that people always kind of gravitate to in the book, is the one-eyed people. And I don't think I've ever heard anything else quite like that in Alaska. There were these hunters that were out paddling around in the bay, and they see another group of hunters, and they're like, who are those guys? We don't recognize them. They're not from around here. So they try to paddle over to them and say hi. And these other hunters, they're like trying to get away from them. They're like not looking at them. They're like keeping their head down. And this is strange behavior. So they're like, what is going on with these guys? So the hunters like pursue them. Eventually they catch up to them. And they're like, hey, who are you guys? What are you doing here? And finally the people turn around and look at them, and they only have one eye in the center of their forehead. And the hunters are like, whoa. And they're like, yeah, we don't, we try not to associate with people too much because, we're different, and they treat us bad. And the hunters were like, well, we're cool, like, here, let's trade some meat. So they like traded some meat. And the one-eyed people were like, yeah, we have a village near here, but we usually don't venture out this far. And, they parted ways, and then they never saw them again. And that's the only story like that I've heard. I don't have any more one-eyed people stories or one-eyed people sightings, but that's like one of the weirdest ones I've ever heard.
Either one, they all died out, or two, that town is still hidden somewhere, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's possible. Maybe they were it was like a family with a certain, defect or something. And they just, they were, what's the word you call when you're, cast out, and they just started their own village somewhere. And then eventually they just all died off.
Yeah, outcasted or something. I mean, you hear about stuff like that all the time down here in the U.S. too. That it usually kind of gets back into like the whole like inbred backwoods kind of story. But I mean, assumably that kind of stuff is going to exist everywhere, and there are going to be inbred families, and from that, people just retelling stories, local legends and everything, and it goes from like one inbred family, and then it turns into like, the melonheads in the woods, or the one-eyed people that have this whole town and stuff, and this whole town was just a house with maybe just a family living there, but just retelling the story and over again. It went from a house to a whole village, Yeah,
but there you go again. There's a grain of truth in it. It's based on something that really happened.
And these are always in super secluded areas too. So again, you kind of really do have to take in the whole inbred factor as a possibility. Or, I mean, you mentioned the fact that, I don't know where it is in correlation with where the location of this story was, but you mentioned the fact that they found like mammoth skulls up there. And I know that like for a while, people believe that mammoth skulls were giant, cyclops heads. Yeah. So, I mean, there could have been an origin of truth to that too, that, they found some mammoth bones, thought it looked like a giant skull with a single eye, and then it kind of just spiraled down from there into all these different stories of these one-eyed people living in this certain area where, it could have been told metaphorically, like, somebody saw this giant head thing, and then they started telling a story of like, oh, this one time I heard this story about this man who, came in contact with the whole village of these things. And then it just kind of, again, transitioned from there, maybe just possibly finding a mammoth skull somewhere in the woods.
Yeah, I'd love the idea that there's still mammoths like running around up here. I don't think it's true. I think they were probably here like a lot later than we think they were. I think they were supposed to die out like 11,000 years ago. Wouldn't surprise me a bit if they were here, 500 years ago. But I don't think, I think we have enough like private aircraft and like people that have their, airplane light. I mean, people fly everywhere between the villages. I think if they were something that big was running around, I think we would have probably had at least a couple of good mammoth sightings by now.
I mean, even on the other side of it too. I mean, how many stories have you heard about like miniature mammoth or miniature elephants living on like certain islands and stuff like that too, where humans were hunting these things into extinction because they were just, meat, they were clothing, they were this, they were that. Like, it was just, they could kill one and they could essentially take care of the whole tribe off of one of these things. So it kind of makes you wonder if there's a possibility that there could have been a niche where these things maybe developed to be a little bit smaller, and maybe they're around like moose size and they're still running around the woods and stuff in the deeper areas. And it's just that people haven't found them. And if they look overhead, it kind of just blends in as possibly like a moose or a bear or whatever, because it just looks like a furry animal that's around this size of all the other animals that are kind of in the area. So you just kind of pass over it.
There's a legend in the interior that there's a tropical valley somewhere in Alaska where basically the ground and everything is like superheated because of a nearby volcano, and everything is it just maintains like a tropical temperature year round. There's this huge valley where basically there's like, I mean, everything from dinosaurs to, I mean, whatever, you know, like all kinds of creatures in there. I don't know. I doubt there's any truth to it, but man, you know, that's the kind of stuff that, if there was a place for that to exist, Alaska would probably be it.
That reminds me a lot of like the Antarctic stories that, you know, people flying too far into the Arctic and then all of a sudden there's like a bunch of trees and a bunch of wilderness and everything. I feel like it's one of those things that with a lot of these stories, you're talking about the grain of truth to them. It may not be that these things literally existed, but living in these cold, harsh environments, you know, you fantasize about there being somewhere warm within the environment. So in turn, it ends up just taking on a life of its own, just out of the desperation of what people wish that was in the area. And then it becomes this elusive thing that, you know, everybody find the tropical area, everybody find the forested area, everybody find this area, but it all just kind of rooted from their prime want of something they needed, and just kind of everybody just adapted to it because everybody kind of still had that same internal need for that to exist somewhere near them.
Or it could be there is like a warm area, you know, that's heated through volcanic vents or something, and you know, it's not a tropical valley, but maybe just like a little area, and somebody found it and was told somebody, and then it grew and grew and grew, and now it's a, you know, it's an entire like Jurassic Park.
It was like a hot spring or something like that somebody found somewhere, and then it just kind of blew up from there. Yeah. Because I mean, when I hear like the whole tropical regions that set up, like I get the whole impression of like there being all these tropical plants and all of this and all of that, but you know, I feel like maybe you could have like warmed, watered areas, and in turn from the water being warmed, it kind of like pushes out a little bit. But I don't see how like the possibility of there just being like a full valley that's somehow just like isolating itself, other than if it's again just from like a water being warm factor where it kind of warms up the land around it possibly.
Yeah, I think it might have, now that I'm thinking about it, that might have like, I might have heard about that in like a Edgar Rice Burroughs book or something. I don't know.
And we of course dived into your book Abandoned, and I know that you have a couple other books. This was the one, luckily, that you were nice enough to give me a copy of when we got to meet at Small Town Monsters. And it seems to be the one that you seem to be the most passionate about. But before we run out of time, of course, I'd like to dive into, I think you have two other books, correct?
Right. Yeah. Abandoned was my first. And, you know, the bestseller, you know, of course, everybody wants to read about Fort Chatham. I mean, it's just, you know, it's an interesting story.
The cover draws in the cryptid community because you got an isolated cabin in the middle of nowhere. Like, got me off the picture.
There was a lady at Monster Fest that picked the book up and she looked at it and she goes, "That's Alaska?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And she was like, "Are you sure?" And I'm like, "I'm pretty sure. I took that picture." And she goes, "Well, I thought Alaska was like ice and snow." And I'm like, "Well, that was taken in September at the very end of summer. So we have other seasons as well, like other than winter."
Damn, you must be right. I must have been in Kentucky when I took that picture. My bad.
I've got Squatch Cop, the investigating and documenting the Bigfoot phenomenon. It kind of talks about how to look for Bigfoot from like a cop's perspective, as far as collecting evidence and documenting evidence. And there's a lot of books out there that have Bigfoot stories about encounters and stuff like that. But I thought, man, there's not a lot of books out there that like for somebody that's interested in going out and looking for Bigfoot, for what do you do when you find something? So I wrote Squatch Cop, and it sold tens of copies. And then this is my latest book, Justice, Morale, and Other Fairy Tales, Alaskan Cop Stories. It's just a collection of stories from my time in law enforcement here in Alaska. But I overestimated the demand for Squatch Cop. I thought like, because there's not really anything else like that out there where like people, a guide to help you look for Bigfoot and document evidence. And I kind of thought, well, people don't really want that. They want scary stories. They don't want to know how to go look for Bigfoot.
Although I do definitely find that interesting, though, because I love talking to people who are former police officers who got into the Sasquatch research. Matt Arner was one of the main ones, of course, that I've had on the show. And, you know, we've got to hang out a couple of times and stuff like that at different conventions. But I always have an appreciation for the way you guys go about the way you like collect the information, because you guys look at it from a very like literal standpoint where you guys just kind of document specifically like this is what happened, this is how you go about it. And I know for him specifically, he does stuff from like the forensic standpoint, so that's a little bit different. But just what you guys bring into the fold as far as like different ways to go about researching the phenomenon, like I think it's definitely something that's helps the community as a whole. But it's one of those things that it's like the researchers are interested in the way you guys research, but the average people that are just into Sasquatch that aren't actually going out and doing all this stuff, it's like they don't have that appreciation for there being a book like that being made and how you guys go about it as far as like, thinking about
it's interesting from a law enforcement perspective. So, excuse me. If somebody called the police department right now and I was working and they said, Shayn just robbed the 7-Eleven down here or whatever you guys have. And
we do have 7-Elevens.
And we don't. I go and they show me some blurry footage of a guy in a black hat and a black shirt. And then somebody says, yep, I saw Shayn. I recognize him. It's Shayn. I saw him and he was running out of the store with a bag of money. And that's enough for me as a police officer to come into your house, and take your freedom away. I can put you in jail just with that. Just some grainy footage and eyewitness testimony. And I can deprive you of your freedom. And think about all the evidence that we have for the existence of Bigfoot. We have the eyewitness testimony. We have footage. We have tracks. We have the historical knowledge, all the stories going back throughout all the history of North America. And think about like that dichotomy, how just with some grainy footage and one eyewitness, I can take away your freedom. And with all the evidence we have for Sasquatch, and we can't make any headway.
And I mean, it's one of those things too, that now that the phenomenon's gotten to a point where it's kind of getting into like the tech age, like it's hard for people to believe stuff anyways. Like if you have the best footage or you have the best vocalizations or you have like a physical body in front of you, but you're like recorded and put it on the internet, it's like, no matter how legitimate things are, people are going to try to call bullshit on it because we just live in the tech age, and that's unfortunately how things are nowadays.
Well, I mean, have you heard of the CSI effect in law enforcement? It's where, so let's say your case goes to trial where, you robbed a 7-Eleven and we show them the video from the store and, people are in the jury are like, why didn't you have that? Enhanced? And I work in a little, like small town police department, with barely like no, like CSI, like everything is in, another town. I've got to send all my evidence off and all that. And we have no like technical crimes department. Like this isn't like on TV where I can like put it in a computer and go enhance. And then it looks like, HD level quality, and, if you can't polish a turd. And if I made this screen any clearer, it would just be a bunch of black pixels. And so, we were running into stuff like that in court where people were like, well, why didn't you get DNA? Why didn't you get, clearer footage? Or why didn't you get this? Or why didn't you get that? And it's like, well, just because it happens on TV doesn't mean it happens in real life.
I think I heard some joke on some, I don't remember what TV show it was, but somebody said something along the lines of like, oh, why don't you have DNA? I think it was Brooklyn Nine-Nine. And the guy started yelling like, there's not semen at every single crime scene. Like not everybody's DNA is everywhere.
Yeah. I was reading an article. I can't remember exactly where it was. It might've been in some law enforcement magazine, where it said something like, if you watch enough television, they'll have you believing that humans are just DNA bombs. And everywhere we go, we just like shed DNA like everywhere, like all over the place,
I mean, in a movie, they'll pick up one little tiny hair off the ground and be like, got him. I think we got the guy. And it's like in real life, there's so much random hair and stuff all over the ground. Like that doesn't happen.
I mean, for real, honestly, Shayn, I can't tell you the number of times that I collected like a cigarette butt from a crime scene and would send it to the crime lab and get the results back like 8 months later. Like I forgot about the case, like I get the lab report from the crime lab and I'm like, is this my case? What is this? And I got to go back and look it up because it's been so long I forgot. And it says like trace male DNA detected, insufficient amount for identification.
So it's like 8 months for nothing.
It was in the dude's mouth, you know, and they can't get enough DNA off of it for identification. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think people really put technology and stuff like that on a pedestal, and I mean, it's great when it works, but you know, it doesn't work all the time.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back. And we are back. So let's hop right in. I mean, even with like smaller cases like that too, it's like all that stuff costs so much money to do. So it's like, imagine all like the taxpayer dollars that would have to be spent if you were trying to have like every single piece of detail to try to convict somebody off of like a petty robbery, for example. Like if you want DNA on this and you want this and you want enhanced video and this and this and this, it's like, you know, the county is going to spend like thousands of dollars trying to put somebody away for stealing like $300 from some local gas station, you know?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you this is a little inside baseball. You know, a lot of these crime labs, they'll outsource a lot of their DNA stuff, or they'll tell you, like, if it's a high profile case, like a sexual assault or a homicide, they'll be like, you know, maybe you should send this to a independent, you know, like another lab. And there was a case we were working, and we sent some DNA to a lab. I don't remember the name of it. Well, I probably shouldn't say it over there anyway, but we sent it to them, and they were like, "Oh yeah, you know, like this DNA is, you know, it's a 1 in so many millions match with this DNA, but if you pay us more, we can narrow it down even further."
Trying to exploit to just try to make some more money.
You're like, they're upcharging you, and I'm like, okay, well, like this is a murder investigation, like. Now you're trying to, now it's like, you know, for more information, pay, you know, like it's behind this paywall. And I'm like, you gotta be freaking kidding me. I
mean, we're trying to get a murderer off the streets, and all you're worried about is, I need a little bit more money in my pocket.
Yeah. Like, well, you know, we found these results, but if you pay us a little more, we can get you even better results. And I was like, what a racket, man. Like people, and I'm sure like the general public has no idea that kind of stuff goes on.
And I mean, even on the other side of it too, that kind of stuff kind of gets scary too, because it's like, if the labs are already trying to exploit you for money to get more information, on the other side, they could easily be like, so you definitely think this is the guy, and you want some solid proof to make sure that this is your guy, right? And then that's when it starts getting into like the sketchier part of how they could possibly be making some money, where it's like somebody's just set on convicting somebody, you know, they might, you know, throw them some extra money, and all of a sudden their DNA is all over it, you know? And it's undeniably their DNA.
Ideally, I mean, they would be able to prove it by showing you the markers and how they align and all that stuff. But they would provide you with an expert witness that would be able to explain it. Because, you know, you want to, if you have a suspect, you get a search warrant for your suspect's DNA. And then, you know, you send your known sample that you got from your warrant and then your unknown sample from the crime lab. And then they compare the two to see if they match. So, and then they want more money to, it's like, well, it's a 1 in like so many million match, but if you pay us more, we can narrow it down to a 1 in so many hundreds match or whatever.
But I mean, on the other side too, like, not to get too far down this rabbit hole, but if they had like your DNA that's unknown and they had the known DNA, and again, they wanted to try to get some more money out of you or just try to embezzle you a bit, you know, they could probably contaminate the one that's unknown with the known DNA too, right? And still kind of make the results come up as they may want them to come up.
I mean, I'm sure it's possible. I don't know if they actually do that kind of stuff. Like I know the one we were dealing with, I mean, they were like trying to upcharge us, but they were pretty reputable. You know, like they were very touted by other law enforcement agencies and stuff like that. I don't know. I don't think they were like framing people. I think if there was no match, there were probably no match, but, you know, I don't know. Who knows what anymore? You know, I used to like think all conspiracy theories were like pretty thin, but anymore I'm just like, I don't think we went to the moon.
That's where I'm at too. Yeah. And I mean, I don't mean to make it sound like I'm talking bad about police officers. I'm talking about like the independent labs where it's like they're not working for the state. They're just simply looking for their profit, and it doesn't matter to them who gets convicted and who doesn't. And it's not some like police conspiracy like the state's after you. It's just independent labs just trying to make that money grab.
Yeah. Well, like I said, hopefully they would be able to like lay it out in court and be like, see how these match. And if they didn't match, they wouldn't be able to do that. But I don't know. I've never had a case that like relied completely on DNA. Usually there's other things, and that's the thing too. Like people think like DNA and all this like technology and stuff is like the actual like that's all you need. And nobody wants to talk to police anymore because they're like, just CSI it, like just CSI it, like I didn't see nothing, just CSI it. And it's like, it takes a village, man. Like if you want change, you got to help your police. Like if you saw something, you have to talk to them.
Mm-hmm. And also too, just because we've been kind of on the topic of talking about this, you mentioned your third book that it's, some of your police encounter reports and stuff like that. Before we start wrapping up, maybe you could share some of your favorite experiences that you possibly shared in that book too.
Oh, geez.
Even if it's non-cryptid related or anything, just, interesting police stories.
I'll tell you a cryptid one. I'll tell you a non-cryptid one. So I was working one night. I was driving. This is back. I hadn't been on too long. I was a relatively new officer. I had a Crown Vic. Are you familiar with those vehicles? It's like the best police car ever made.
That's honestly what half of Detroit drives. It's the old Crown Vics that used to be police cars.
Oh, it's a great car. Side note, they got me a new car and got rid of they like that was like an extra car in the fleet. And then one day I came in and it was like gone. And I'm like, what happened to it? Was 510 was the name of the number of the vehicle. I'm like, what happened to 510? They're like, I don't know. And then one day I went to the dump and was like throwing something away. And it's like sitting in the dump and like some dude's like taking parts off of it. And I felt so bad because I was like, man, if I knew they were just going to throw it away, like I would have taken it and like fixed it up and like gave it I was like, she didn't deserve that. She was a good ride. But anyway.
Could have turned her into like a display car or something to take her to car shows,
Yeah, man. I mean, it was, I don't know. I love that car. Anyway, so I'm driving that car and it's raining really hard. It's kind of foggy. It's just really bad weather. And I'm going up this really steep hill. And I'm starting to plateau. I'm starting to come to the top of the hill. There's not really any houses or anything around. I'm kind of going outside of town. And I come up on this hill and my lights hit something in the middle of the road. And I'm like, what is that? Because it's raining and it's kind of foggy. And I'm like, what the hell is that? And my first thought is like, oh my God, there's a little kid in the road. And then I start slowing down. And I'm like, wait, that's not a little kid. And then I swear to God, it looks like a gray alien. Like I see like these big black eyes. It's probably about 3.5, maybe 4 feet tall. And it's over, it's over the hood of my Crown Vic. And I'm creeping up on it, trying to figure out what I'm looking at. And I'm like, that's an alien. I'm like, this is it. I'm going to get taken. I'm going to get probed. Like, who's going to, are they going to bring me back by the end of my shift? Like, I'm like, do I turn around and run? Like, what do I do? Do I shoot it? Like, I'm like, my head is just going through like all these, like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Like, is my car going to die? And so as I'm starting to slow down and all of a sudden these wings come out and this thing flies over the top of my car. And it was an owl. It was like a great northern owl. But just, it was sitting there and it had its wings tucked in and it just had those big black eyes and it looked like an alien.
Man, that'd be horrifying anyways. And I mean, that kind of fits in with the whole, like, was it an alien? Was it an owl? Or is it a screen memory? But I mean, on the other side too, the origin comes from somewhere. I mean, these things honestly do look like gray aliens if you catch them in the right light.
And I've read, was it Mike Clelland's book about the like owls and aliens and the visit. What's the name of it? I don't remember the name of it, but I've read that book somewhere, and it just like, oh my gosh, like this is it. Like I'm gonna get taken. But yeah, he flew like right over the hood of my car, and I swear his wingspans was wider than my vehicle. He was about 3.5, 4 foot tall. He was the biggest bird I've ever seen. I think it was bigger than a lot of the eagles I've seen.
And that's like a hard idea to like, because most people they see an owl and they just assume, they don't imagine the size of it. It's kind of like we were talking about earlier with moose. It's like you don't actually get a size comparison to these things until it's actually physically right in front of you. And even just like a normal comparison for people, it's like, you see traffic lights every day. They don't look like they're that big, but you get them on the ground, they're the same height as like a standing adult. Like humans have a really bad size comparison from a distance seeing things. They don't realize.
Yeah, there must have been some like roadkill or something on the road he was like after or looking at. And I've heard like, well, owls don't hunt when it's raining, but he was out. I saw him. It was raining. So I don't know. That's like the weirdest thing that's probably ever happened to me on duty. Never had any like real like Bigfoot calls or anything like that. Because I mean, we worked in the city. We didn't work anywhere outside of that. Although we did have one guy call one night and say Bigfoot took his potatoes from his campsite. But I mean, he's in a campsite almost in the middle of town. I mean, there were like woods and stuff like that backed up the hill, actually toward where I live. And we got there and we looked around, and you know it'd been raining and there was no tracks anywhere. And of course, my partner's calling me crazy. He's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm looking for tracks. And he's like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, go look for the Bigfoot tracks. And it just, you know, the guy had some substance abuse issues and he was probably having some hallucinations or something. But he never got his potatoes back. I don't know what happened to him. So
it was a homeless guy who ran up and they stole his potatoes, and he was like, "Holy shit, it's a Sasquatch!" Because the guy had overgrown hair.
It might have been. Who knows? And then so I try to put funny stories in the book because you know being in law enforcement or any kind of job like that, you know, you kind of develop like a sense of humor to deal with things. And one of my favorite stories is I'm driving around one day, and I see this kid coming toward me. He's driving a canary yellow Crown Vic. So it's a huge boat of a car, and it's yellow. It used to be an old taxi cab. And I look, and I see this kid, and I know who he is. We'll call him Billy. And I'm like, that's freaking Billy. And I'm like, I don't think Billy has a license. So I get on the radio, and I'm like, does Billy have a license? And dispatch is like, no, Billy does not have a license. So I turn around, pull him over, and I'm talking to him, and you know, I'm giving him a ticket for driving without a license. And I'm like, you know, Billy, you're not exactly inconspicuous driving around this big yellow car. And he goes, officer, I swear I wasn't trying to be inconspicuous.
I figured if I just, you know, drove the yellow car, it'd be obvious, and you know, you'd look over it. I was just trying to save my grandma. I was trying to, you know, get her to the hospital because she's pregnant.
Yeah, I've had a few of those where somebody's speeding, you go to pull them over, and they just keep driving to the hospital, and then they're like, "Oh, my girlfriend's having a seizure or something," and you're like, "All right," and then you know you drive off, and then you're like, "How long are they going to sit in the waiting room before?"
They're already dedicated. I'm just gonna watch how this one plays out. You just gotta wait for him to leave, and then you're like, "So, how's your girlfriend doing?" I was concerned, so I sat around just to make sure she was okay. And I guess kind of starting to wrap up towards the end, I would absolutely love to have you come back on the show again, even if we just kind of dive into some of these police stories. Like, I always find this kind of stuff interesting anyways, but I feel like there's still a lot of different stuff we could definitely talk to, but this was definitely a fun introduction, since, again, we didn't really get too much of a chance to meet or to talk too much at Small Town Monster Fest. But if there was any words of wisdom that you might want to leave the listeners with, what might it be?
It's not my quote. I think maybe Art Bell might have said it. I don't know for sure, but I always like to say, have an open mind, but not so much that your brain falls out.
I like it. Yep. I think it was Art Bell that said that. And for anybody that's not familiar with Art Bell, he is like one of the most legendary, strange phenomenon broadcasters in history.
Pro tip, I don't know if you're still there, but I know as of a couple of months ago, you could get on Spotify and find like a bunch of his old stuff. Particularly, I was listening to the episodes on like September 11th and a couple of days afterwards. Those are really interesting to go back and listen to.
Dude, there's actually part of what got me into, actually before I started listening to like podcasts and getting into all that stuff, I found this app on my phone that was like basically just a bunch of like radio stations, and one of them was like an Art Bell station. It would just play repeats of Art Bell all day. So I listened to that at work, and it would just, they wouldn't be in any kind of specific order or anything, but like still fascinating, especially going back and hearing some of them. Like one of the ones that stuck out to me was the one where the guy's flying over Area 51 and he's like getting all the everything broken out. And I don't know if it's legitimate or not, but like it had me on the edge of my seat listening to it the whole time. And Art Bell's just like, "What are you seeing now? What are you seeing? There's their planes next to you." Like he was just so into it, trying to figure out what's going on as this guy's like, "Yeah, I'm probably shouldn't be here right now," but
Art Bell was a master, man. He's like, "I don't know about you folks, but I'm going to keep my eyes open in the skies," or something like that. I mean, he was just always like, he just knew what to say and when to say it. He was great.
The good old high desert. That's where that whole like thing became popularized, where everybody uses like from the high desert now. But
I know. I should do it from the low tundra.
Yeah, from the low tundra. But you got to do it in the deep, low voice, so you just draw people in.
I know. I don't have a voice or a face for radio.
I definitely got the face for radio. That's why I prefer doing all the podcast stuff instead of video stuff on YouTube. But if anybody was interested in coming finding your books, coming finding your podcasts, sharing some of their experiences, or getting hold of you for any reason whatsoever, where can everybody find you on the internet, and where can everybody come and find your books?
The books are available on Amazon, or if you want autographed copies, you can go to alasquatchpodcast.com and order some autographed copies there. I do have to charge shipping because it's Alaska. And
it's got to go through Canada. You got to pay the customs, I assume, even if it is going into the U.S.
It goes straight down. It's just, it costs a little bit more for, it's more than I can write off for a business expense. But, yeah, I can ship books, autograph them. I'll put anything in there you want within reason. A lot of people like to buy them as gifts for people. You can find me on YouTube. I have a Alasquatch podcast YouTube channel. I post my podcast there, and occasionally, like if I go out and do a trip or a camping trip, I'll post some footage from that. Recently went out to Hatcher Pass with Chuk and Rob Roy. That's a really interesting area I'd never been to before. And holy cow, it was like 80 degrees up there. Like I was not prepared for that. I'm like wearing like a jacket and like long jeans, and everybody else is like in tank tops and shorts. And I was like, I was not expecting 80 degrees in Alaska. So that was a fun trip. We did go panning, which I'd never done before. Didn't find anything, but it was a cool experience.
I was going to say, at least you can say it's something you've done before. Knock it off the checklist.
Yeah. And other than that, I mean, you can, there's a contact form on my website that you can reach me, or you can just email me at alasquatchpodcast@gmail.com.
Well, man, I appreciate you making the time to come on today. It was an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. It was a really fun conversation, and I'm looking forward to doing it again next time.
All right. Sounds good, man. Just let me know when, and I'll be there.
If anyone is interested in being a guest on the show to share their experiences or to share their research, or if anybody's interested in having me as a guest on their show, or if you're interested in sponsoring the show or getting a hold of me for any reason whatsoever, you guys can get a hold of me through email, which is increaseofourealitypodcast@outlook.com, or you guys can get a hold of me through social media. Instagram and Facebook are the ones that I'm the most active on. And or you guys can also go to the link tree and you guys can fill out the submission form, and that will go directly to my email. There is another submission form over there for reporting an encounter, so make sure you guys click on the right one. And while you guys are going and checking out anyways, don't forget to report those encounters to ommencounterreports@outlook.com, or use that submission form on the link tree. And everything that I mentioned today is all available in the link tree, which is available down in the show description. And with that, hope you guys enjoyed the conversation, and I'll catch you on the next one. Have a good night, everybody.
Reality isn't what it seems. Abductees taking aboard a craft with a tractor beam. Is life a simulation or an astral dream? Aliens travel through black holes in different galaxies. Life is a bizarre odyssey, with the mic talking about philosophy. Well, Bigfoot is stalking campers as a Wendigo walks through the woods of sharpened antlers, using a Ouija board to talk to the dead like a necromancer. There's so many questions and not enough answers. So if you're interested in mysteries and abnormalities, tune in and listen to Inquiries of Our Reality. So if you're interested in mysteries and abnormalities, tune in and listen to Inquiries of Our Reality.